Now let's consider a familiar scenario. 4 publishers are working rural territory in a car group. Now each home is separated from the next by many miles or kilometers. At the first call, the driver and her companion get out and the other sisters stay in the car. They have no choice. There's no place to go. Now the householder has many questions, and a Bible study is started. It's noon when the 2 publishers return to the car. All smiles. You know what's coming next, don't you? One of the sisters in the back seat says, "Well, the 2 of us can't count any time this morning." What's she done? She's spoken for herself and for her companion, and unintentionally, she's imposed her own conscience on her friend. Now, if she doesn't want to count any time, that's her business. But it would be best if she kept her business to herself.
Ooh, this is interesting. So this is apparently a familiar scenario featured in the talk Safeguard Our Uniting Bond of Peace as delivered by governing body member David Splaine. It would be a familiar scenario for a group of women to go out in their car, and if 2 of those women took a little bit too much time on one of their calls in rural territory, where the other 2 women in the car can't get out and preach at other homes because the homes are all too far apart, it would be familiar for those 2 women to return and one of their companions to complain about not being able to count time. And I think this little situation, this scenario that David Splaine has thought up and included in his talk really tells us 2 things. First of all, it tells outsiders all about the culture of counting time. What that means is when Jehovah's Witnesses call at your home, they're not just doing it casually. It's not just a case of, oh, I think I'll do some preaching today, and maybe I'll do 5 minutes and then go do something else. The minute they start preaching to someone in any given day, the clock starts. They start timing how many hours of preaching they have done in that day. And at the end of the day, at some point, they will write down the number of hours of preaching, and all of this gets accumulated on a slip of paper so that at the end of the month, they can hand a slip of paper to an elder in their congregation and tell the congregation how many hours of preaching they have done in a month. So this whole issue of counting time can be quite a complicated thing because different Jehovah's Witnesses, as has been alluded to here, have different consciences when it comes to what constitutes counting time and what is invalid, what would be dishonest when it comes to counting time. Do you have to be continually preaching to people, or can there be long periods of time throughout the day when you're not preaching to anyone for whatever reason and keep counting your time? Now, I was the sort of pioneer who would have been counting my time because I would have thought, well, it's beyond my control. If they come back quickly, I'm prepped and I'm ready to carry on preaching. So I shouldn't really have to take time off my day just because they're having a productive call. But I'm sure there would have been other Jehovah's Witnesses who, like the sister described, would have thought, well, I can't count any of this time because I'm not preaching to anyone. And notice how David Splaine doesn't give a definitive answer here. So he could just clear it all up for everyone, but he'd rather leave us all dangling. So first of all, we're learning that Jehovah's Witnesses think it's the Christian thing to do to start a stopwatch when they start preaching to their fellow man. When they're delivering Christ's message of good news, apparently they need to time themselves Apparently, that's what the Bible writers had in mind. That's what Jesus had in mind when he said, "Go therefore and preach this good news of the kingdom. By the way, don't forget to keep a record of how many hours you do, and don't forget to give that number of hours every month to an elder in your congregation." That's what Jesus had in mind, apparently. We're not just learning about this culture of counting time. Thank you, David, by the way. We're also learning, again, that this is a misogynist organization. Because why did it have to be sisters? Why did it have to be women who were bickering in this way? And bear in mind, this is an organization that usually, when they're writing their material, when they're writing their scenarios in letters to elders, they will typically refer to men. They will say he or him when referring to a Jehovah's Witness in a hypothetical scenario. They do it all the time. It's actually quite frustrating. They could simply say they or them so that it's ambiguous, so that it could apply to anyone. But they always say he or him when they're referring to an unknown person in their publications. But in this particular scenario, for some reason, David Splaine insists on them being female.